Do want to take you out to some of the big stories that we are following at this hour here. Take a look at this video as we get to the latest out of the Middle East. Hundreds, possibly thousands of people within the Gaza Strip gathering to protest against the Hamas terror group. Now, this is just some of the video coming in courtesy the Center for Peace Communications. And in that video, you can actually hear chants of, quote, Hamas, get out. Gaza's people don't want wars. They demand the end of Hamas's rule. They demand peace, end quote. This comes as the war continues to escalate in Gaza between Israel and Hamas after a weeks-long ceasefire abruptly ended when Hamas would not budge on requests by Israel to extend phase 1 of the agreement. As always, a lot to discuss here, so I do want to bring in Alex Traiman, the CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief at the Jewish News Syndicate. Thank you so much, as always, Alex, for taking the time to be here with us.
Josh, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I do want to ask you about these protests, because we've seen some smaller protests and demonstrations in the past there in Gaza, but this one appears to be a little bit larger. Is that something that we are expecting to see more of there, and how significant is it to see that?
I think we will see more of this in the coming weeks. The reason why we haven't really seen protests of this nature previously is because Hamas is a terrorist organization that puts its own civilians in harm's way and has sought to prevent such protests violently on the streets of Gaza previously. There was even reports that in these protests that there were Hamas security officers dressed as civilians attempting to break up these protests. But certainly Gazan citizens should be looking at the situation around them and realize that all of the destruction that's taken place in Gaza Strip over the last 16 months has been caused by Hamas's attack of Israel on October 7th, and that Hamas does not give the Gazan people any hope for a peaceful future.
And again, you are taking a look at just some of that video coming in for the Center for Peace Communications. Now, are we essentially in an all-out war again between Israel and Hamas, with the situation returning to kind of the way it was prior to that ceasefire agreement, as Hamas did not accept the plan there by Israel?
Well, you're correct to note that we're no longer in a period of agreed upon ceasefire. At the same time, we're not yet in a period of all-out war. To basically announce kind of the end of the ceasefire, even a few weeks after the ceasefire deal expired, Israel has conducted very highly targeted strikes at Hamas terror operatives, some of the top members of the Hamas chain of command. But we're not yet seeing a full return to high-scale violence against Hamas by the IDF. But I do think that we're getting closer and closer towards that if Hamas does not agree to release the remaining hostages.
We heard from Israel's President Herzog, who said that it appears that Israel is kind of losing its focus there on returning the hostages, saying that that does not appear to be the primary focus. I did want to ask you, based on that statement here, what is the relationship like between Herzog and Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister?
Well, I think that there's some broad disagreement with that statement. The prime minister has said that it's only military force, the threat of military force, that will push Hamas into concessions. Whenever Hamas feels they have the upper hand, they raise the stakes in the negotiations. But then the relationship between Herzog and Netanyahu is not a strong relationship. You know, Herzog ran for the prime ministership against Prime Minister Netanyahu in 2015 as the head of the left-wing Labor Party. He's no friend of the prime minister. He could have ended a lot of the domestic disputes in Israel by stepping up and calling for unity, and even potentially for pardoning Prime Minister Netanyahu in these trials that have been now ongoing for 5 years and don't seem to be heading toward any kind of a conviction by any standards. But unfortunately, like many of the other members of the political system, Netanyahu and Herzog are at odds with one another.
We've heard about all of the controversy surrounding the removal of the head of the Shin Bet there. Can you explain how pivotal the Shin Bet is going to be there when you're talking about a time of war, which is obviously what we've seen since October 7th of 2023?
Well, the Shin Bet is the internal security services, but in Israel, we have a complex situation where Gaza, which is considered an enemy territory, is also considered to be an internal security threat. This it's essentially the Israeli FBI, and they are largely responsible for security, maintaining security with regards to Gaza. It's super important for the prime minister to have a head of the Shin Bet, a security agency that he trusts. Remember that this position is part of the executive branch of the government, and it has been clear over the last several weeks and months that both Barr and Netanyahu have not been on the same page about how to conduct the war, how to conduct the hostage negotiations, and there's also serious questions being raised by the prime minister about why the head of the Shin Bet did not alert the prime minister on the early morning and overnight prior to October 7th, allowing this attack to take place without the prime minister's knowledge.
And obviously a situation that we're following there as it has been developing. Now, the direct talks between the U.S. and Hamas, is there any fallout from that? Obviously, Israel not necessarily happy when you talk about the fact that the U.S. was directly communicating with Hamas when it, comes to the American hostages that are there. Has there been any sort of fallout between Israel and the U.S. or even President Trump and Netanyahu?
Well, I do think that Israel was upset that the United States had entered into negotiations directly with Hamas without Israel's prior knowledge. For Israel, it's very important that the two countries will be lockstep with regard to what the policies are going to be. But I do think that it has all really worked out for the best. Adam Boehler was not successful in negotiating with Hamas, and he's been removed from the hostage negotiations. Steve Witkoff seemingly acknowledging, as you mentioned, that perhaps he was duped by Hamas. And I do believe that there are a lot of elements that are trying to create a rift between the Trump administration and the Netanyahu government, particularly among the left wing in Israel, because they see Trump's backing as being a number one element of Netanyahu's political power in Israel, and they're trying to ruin that. But I do believe that the president is aware of this campaign, and he is also aware that the prime minister is under some of the same threats that the president himself is under from what the president and Netanyahu refer to as their respective deep states in their country. And it seems as though the two administrations still are working pretty well together.
And Alex, I did want to ask you, we've talked about Hamas a lot here, but one thing that we've also discussed, we have Hezbollah over in Lebanon, also the Houthis in Yemen there. Anything you want to add about that and what we're seeing as far as the situation plays out with those terror groups?
Well, as the ceasefire breaks down in Gaza, we recall that the Houthis have said since the beginning of the war that they were going to be attacking Israel and interrupting commercial shipping as long as Israel and Gaza were at war. So as that front, the Gaza front, picks up, we've seen an increase in rocket fire from the Houthis on several consecutive nights over the last several days. Israelis all across the country have been running into bomb shelters as ballistic missiles have been fired at Israel. Israel's been successful in intercepting those missiles. At the same time, the United States seems pretty fed up with what has been taking place out of Yemen, with the interruption of international shipping, with the firing of ballistic missiles at Israel, and maybe more importantly, the direct attacks on U.S. naval vessels that are patrolling the region. And they've been conducting attacks in Yemen against Houthi infrastructure and top leadership. So we are seeing sort of return to war. And you'll recall that Israel really stopped the fighting because of the desire to negotiate to get hostages out. Once Hamas has said that they're no longer willing to return hostages to Israel, we're seeing Israel want to return to its initial goal, stated goal of a total victory, at least on the Gaza front. And that can cause tremendous instability both with Hezbollah and with the Houthis.
All right. Alex Traiman, thank you as always for taking the time to join us. Anything you want to add about any of this before I let you go?
Well, I still think it's important to note that the United States has announced publicly that it's holding Iran responsible for every missile fired by the Houthis. It has implored Iran to make the Houthis stop their fight. And it's Iran that is the #1 backer and financer and supplier of the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Hamas in Gaza. And it does appear as though the president of the United States is running out of patience with the Iranian regime. He is calling for some kind of negotiation whereby the Americans will be able to come in peacefully and dismantle the Iranian nuclear program, which is an illicit program. If those negotiations don't work, I do think that we may be getting closer and closer to an Israeli strike or a joint Israeli and American strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. So certainly we're probably nowhere near the end of this war, even though many people would like to see a quiet Middle East.
All right. Alex, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here and break it all down. We appreciate it.
Josh, as always, thanks for having me.